Well, hello everyone, and welcome again to Talking Point. I'm Mayor Mike, and today my guest is County Executive Patty Dreier. Hi, Patty. Welcome.
Hello, hello. It's weird to be sitting in this chair.
Is it? Interesting. So what we're going to do today is something a little bit different. It started out as kind of a gag that turned into something much more significant. So we're going to share a couple of stories with you. For 20 plus odd years, I make one Super Bowl bet every year. A friend of mine and I bet on the coin toss, and we bet $1. Now, logic would tell you it's a coin toss, so I should win about 50% of the time. Well, that hasn't happened. In those 20 plus years, I've won twice. The first time was 8 or 9 years ago. And I took that $1, and I wanted to do something significant with it to commemorate the win. My daughter was traveling to Europe, so I gave her the $1, and I said, Madison, do something fun with this. Make a story out of this $1. Well, she did. They toured Italy and Greece, and while in Rome, they went to Vatican City, and she put that $1 in the Sistine Chapel. So that was a heck of a story. We had a $1 of mine that was in the Sistine Chapel in Vatican City. Well, the next time I won was this past year, and I wanted to do something significant. It's hard to top the Sistine Chapel, but I knew that County Executive Patty Dreier and her husband Tom were planning a memorial trip to Europe, covering D-Day and some of the things that happened there. So what I did was I talked to Patty and asked her if she could do something with that $1, even leaving it on the beach in Normandy or something to have that story. What she did was something I never expected, and we're here to share that story with you. So she took the $1 and went to Europe. And Patty, I'll let you take the story from there.
Wow. Well, first of all, when you gave me the $1, I didn't expect to do anything that would bring us to a project like we're about to unveil in this show in honor of Veterans Day. But this was in June, and we went on a World War II history tour, Tom and I. And as the tour started in Normandy, we were out getting over our jet lag and so on, and I didn't expect today would be the day, certainly not any first or second day or so, that I'd really be pulling that $1 out of my pocket to do anything in particular with it. And I also wanted to be really respectful of the fact that, I mean, these are very somber sites. I remember going to the American Cemetery near Omaha Beach, where nearly 9,400 people are buried, soldiers and officers and some women and who are medics and so on were buried there after the D-Day experience just left us with so much loss on those shores. And so it didn't feel right, of course, and I know you wouldn't have felt right about that either, to do any such thing with a $1 in my pocket, especially when remember, it's euros, euros if I'm in Germany, to say it the German way, in Europe. So anyway, on one of the days early in our trip, we end up going on a bus trip, and we get out at this crossroads where there's a medieval church in front of us. I mean, it looks like this fortress kind of structure. And we look at a monument first, and at this monument, I'm still not not knowing what I'm going to be doing with this $1. So anyway, we start to learn about this story. The story of Drop Zone D and the paratroopers from the 101st Division, Airborne Division, that were dropped in the area around where we were standing, and how the fields have been flooded. Not the Allies didn't know it, but the dikes were stopped up by the Germans, and the fields were flooded. So when many paratroopers dropped, they drowned rather than got their legs, if you would. Anyway, there were a couple of medics that made it safely to ground and came to this fortress church, and it's from there that the story started to be unveiled to me, and I decided that it was going to be something I wanted to do with your $1 there. So we're standing here, and we learn about Mr. Wright, a private, and Mr. Moore, a private. They were both medics, and they hadn't had much training at all. They had only enlisted right after Pearl Harbor, really, and hadn't ever seen combat before. But when they came upon this crossroads with this church and a cemetery outside, they just went to work. And they created a safe harbor. And what we learned was that if you were a German soldier that was wounded, or if you were an American soldier that was wounded, or if you were a local villager that was wounded, this was a place for you to get aid. It had already been pre-positioned as kind of a place where they were going to assemble anyway, but to create a hospital and actually end up serving 80 combatants in the pews, laying in the pews, and having 2 paratroopers die on the altar in the church, it began to really hit home. For the blood-stained pews are still there today. The cracked tile floor where the mortar shell came through the roof and landed on the floor and didn't explode, or certainly the church wouldn't be there today, still is there. So it just began to make it real. And what we learned was in this village where the Lord Mayor, Daniel Hemken from the village, had greeted us that day, our small bus of 14 people or so, with Francois, our field guide. And so as I'm meeting the mayor, then now my light bulb's going on thinking, wouldn't it be great if Mayor Mike Wiza could meet Mayor Daniel Hemken, maybe someday. And I know that the Lord Mayor in Angovillle, Au Plain, the name of the village that we're standing at this moment in the story, in June, in about an hour from the Normandy beaches, just on the western part of Normandy. Anyway, on this particular day, I'm thinking, gosh, it would be so cool to link these 2 mayors. So that's kind of where the project comes from. As we go inside and we have an opportunity to learn that the village has been struggling, especially as World War II veterans are passing away quickly every day, right? So many more are gone forever, and that we become more distanced from the opportunity of people continuing to make the trips to remember and to donate, that maybe you and I could join together when I came back by asking you, maybe you and I could join together and help raise a few dollars for the restoration of this medieval church.
And I think that was a great idea. There's a whole lot more to the story, I know, but that really does sum it up a little bit. Everybody remembers, Band of Brothers or Saving Private Ryan, when it really brought home what happened 75, 77 years ago, whatever it happens to be. And everybody knows Sam Mergley's, the push inward, the 101st dropping in, things like that. Let's talk a little bit about the town, because this isn't something that makes a map or makes the history books, but it was still very much a part of that time period.
Indeed. They say by the way, anybody who's listening can just do a search on Angovillle and Angovillle, Au Plain, and you will have a whole lot of hits on Google to be able to even watch the videos of these World War II veterans telling their very own stories, which is truly incredible. So this was an older church, one of the oldest in the whole region. Once you start to learn about it, it's 12th century. And because of the mortar blasts all around that rocked the church, all the windows were broken. So what you would find today, and there are some photos that will be on the screen that will show you that we've got the Statue of Liberty on a church window. We've got an American eagle. We've got a paratrooper. There are many of these windows and restorations to this point in time that have been funded by the support of people across the world that gave some dollars. But it really is only a village of about 30 to 40 people today.
Yeah. What we're about to unveil, I suppose, the project, if you will, is going to support some of those restoration efforts. Again, a small town, an old church that most people will never see, but just what you were talking about with the stained glass windows, it's very clear that it's significant to a lot of people. And so let's talk about the need a little bit, and how you came to know the church, and talk about some of the challenges that they've faced, and then maybe we can talk about what your idea was and how we can partner with that.
Well, I'm in contact with my tour guide, Francois, over in Europe right now, and he is continuing to connect with Daniel, the Lord Mayor. And what we're doing is we're assembling a list of what they're looking for. but I know that it's the normal stuff. When you walk in, anybody that's been over in Europe to walk in medieval churches, you know that whether it's the rock wall around it, or whether it's the door casings, or whether it's the floor or the woodwork or the statues or whatever it is inside the church, that there are just so many needs, and they all cost quite a bit to keep up this kind of 12th century monument. But at the same time, they want to ensure that it remains there to continue to share the story, as the Lord Mayor is quoted in news articles sharing, the dichotomy of D-Day, where soldiers are killing each other out in the cemetery, these are his words, and in the church they're saving each other's lives. All the guns, all the weapons were not allowed in the church, so the medics were forcing people to lean those weapons up against the wall outside, and then they could come in. They even scoured the countryside to go bring people in. A couple of Germans were up in the rafters of wherever up in the top of the church, and came down after a day or two, afraid all along. And here it was, this hospital in the process. So as far as what we're going to do is, we're going to gather some dollars here from our local community, and we'll receive those funds in the Community Foundation of Central Wisconsin in an Angovillle Veterans Fund that you and I will have designated, and then we'll connect those dollars to the village in Angovillo Plain. So it'll be to a government account where then they can help to keep this monument, keeping that story of heroism alive.
And that's fabulous. We'll have some more information later in the show about the project and how you can help and how your friends can help. We'll have it on Facebook, social media. We'll get you the links to that shortly. Excuse me. You had told me a story about the two privates, Private Moore, and why don't you share that with our listeners, because I think that puts a face to things.
Well, if it's the story I'm thinking of, because I've probably told you a couple. Medic Wright and Medic Moore were people who had gone back, troops that had gone back during different anniversaries, and so they had a relationship with Angovillo Plain over the years until they each passed away in this last decade. And each one of these individuals having these special ties meant a lot to the village, and that's why, the Lord Mayor is so much in the picture. Mr. Wright himself ended up having his remains cremated, and half of him is put to rest in the cemetery outside of this church in Angovillo Plain, and the other half at home here in America. I believe that was Ohio, where he is from. So is that the story you were thinking about, Mayor?
I was thinking there was one where it was a grenade that came through the window.
Yeah, it was, the mortar shell landed unexploded in the church. And then this individual, I don't remember which medic it is at this point in time. My husband would probably remember every single detail from having Francois tell us. Picked that mortar shell up and whipped it out the next window, and it landed out in the courtyard and still was unexploded. Had it, so it was a dud, and we were so lucky for the 80 combatants and that child.
This came right through the roof of the church that was being used as a hospital, a medic unit, like you see in the movies. And something, I would like to think it's a higher power that allowed that mortar shell to hit its target but not do any damage.
It's very interesting that in the stained glass windows in the Angovillo Plain Church, as well as in a statue that's there, there's the Saint Damien that is represented. And when you look up, and Francois, of course, tells us every detail, right? But when you look up what Saint Damien represents, it's for those that are suffering. So it's Saint Damien is for the suffering. So it started to be, holy cow, this is truly incredible, where you have people filling the pews as injured individuals. And the job of the medics, as they tell the story, was through the literature, when you can watch the YouTube videos and stuff, was to stop the bleeding and to administer morphine. And neither of them had a lot of medical training, only a couple of weeks. But Mr. Wright was the person that had a little bit more medical training. So he was the one left in the church, and Mr. Moore would go around the area, the countryside. He'd take an old cart that he found from one of the villagers, and he would use that to bring back more casualties. There was a child from the local village that had also been injured, so they were trying to help this child as well. And this place, again, at this crossroads, you can imagine, it changed hands a couple of times over that, from D-Day over the next couple of days. And the Americans had come in and said to the two medics, listen, we don't know that we could hold this any longer. The Germans are coming. We don't know that we can hold it any longer. They looked at each other, they made a decision, but we've got to stay because we've got 80 folks in this hospital aid station that we're caring for, and we can't leave them. So they did, and they let the higher powers do and be as they may, and it wasn't very long, and the Americans came back and said, we got it back again. So, I mean, truly, this is that little bit of a nugget about how incredible D-Day must have been and how extraordinary these 20-something-year-olds were to be in the middle of combat when they had come from a place of peace.
Yeah, it's amazing. I can't ever wrap my head around this, to imagine what those soldiers and medics and civilians had gone through all those years ago. You know, they say that the worst of times brings out the best in people, and this really seems like an example of that. Now, I know you've got some information regarding Drop Zone D and some of the stories briefly of the people that were there. You want to take a moment and maybe read one or two?
Sure. First of all, there is a monument right outside the cemetery, adjacent to the cemetery, I should say, of what this story is all about. So I had photographed it because I knew I wanted to remember the story as it was written there on that particular monument. So, located at a crossroads, it goes on to read, okay? It says that the church is a haven of peace in the middle of terrible combat. Located on a crossroads and being a pre-planned assembly area, as the combat raged, casualties began to arrive in large numbers. 2 2nd Battalion medics, Robert E. Wright from Ohio and Kenneth J. Moore of California, worked tirelessly inside the church for 2 nights and days to save lives. Several dozen men were treated, and both men were awarded the Silver Star for their devotion to duty. Not that Angovillle escaped death completely. 2 paratroopers died in the church of their wounds. And what I learned was, as we're standing there in the church, and we can see the blood on the pews, the wooden pews, that still is stained and will remain as part of the memory there today, but that they created a more dire need area of among the casualties, sort of a triage area up near the altar, and that altar then was where at least 1 paratrooper died.
Wow.
So to stand there and then to imagine, because you know you're going to all of these places, you stand on the beaches, Omaha Beach, Utah Beach. Utah Beach is the one closest to Angovillle Plain. And when you're standing there and you see this wide expanse of sand and these cliffs if you're at Omaha Beach and so on and so forth, where the Rangers, you know, climbed and fought all those odds and continued on their way so that they could liberate Europe, really, truly liberate Europe. When you're standing there, it all looks so peaceful today, and you can't imagine like one specific site or place. But let me tell you, these altars in medieval churches don't move.
Yeah.
So when you're standing there and you see and you touch the altar where one of our own died as a result of their wounds of World War II, then it becomes an entirely different thing. So as I'm in this church, Mayor Wiza, and I'm hearing this and being filled with probably one of the most amazing, experiences in a somber way in Europe, then that's where they point out that they were looking for donations, and that anybody that comes to the church, and there are many that miss this stop along their Normandy tour. It's very interesting that folks from Angovillle would welcome a donation or two, and of course we could light a candle. Well, I did. I lit a candle. I donated your dollar. Pulled it out of my pocket and made sure that Tom snapped a picture of me donating your dollar there, where I felt like, you know what, that's the best thing to do here. And then I talked with some other people on our bus, and I said, you know, when I get back, I'm going to link our mayor to this mayor, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to raise some money for Angovillle Plain. And they were filled with wonder about all of it too, about that this would be a great cause for us to give even a few extra bucks out of our own pockets just to keep this kind of important memory alive.
Right. And, you know, I can't imagine what your experiences were during that trip. It sounds wonderful. I hope that someday my wife and I will be able to do something very similar. You know, I have stories from friends who served in World War II. Mr. Rainier and your friend and mine, Will Lehner, who was just on the news last night. You know, we're coming up on the 75th anniversary of Pearl Harbor this coming December. It's hard to imagine how long ago that was. But we're talking about the timing of this project. And we're kicking off the fundraising on Veterans Day, November 11th. And we'll run it for about a month. We'll go through the December 7th anniversary. And hopefully after that, we'll have a sizable sum of money to send to Angovillle Plain to help them with their memorial and restoration projects. So I encourage everyone who's watching and listening to contact either County Executive Dreier or myself, but we'll also have it shared on our social media pages, probably get it out in print media. Or just give me a call. You call me at home, or I'm sure you can call County Executive Dreier, and we'll get you the information. But it's going to be at the Community Foundation of Central Wisconsin, and they have a website as well, and we'll have a link to the Angoville Veterans Fund. We don't have a name for it yet, but we'll get that out there. We want something significant. And encourage you to share it with your friends and tell the story and link them to this video so they can hear the story of what went on, 70 plus years ago during the D-Day invasion, now that we're celebrating the anniversary of the U.S.'s entry into World War II with Pearl Harbor. So Patty, so we don't leave on a sad note, tell us about some of the other exciting things that you did while you were on that tour. I mean, what other things were significant? I know this one is pretty hard to top. Right.
Well, we went through the area of Normandy, but then we went into Belgium, and it's not that it's a sad note. I mean, it's a courageous note that we actually stood beside foxholes and so on, and the places where the American general said, "Oh, nuts."
Yep.
You know, nuts when the Americans, the Allies were asked to surrender, and that just mobilized, that energized the troops, and the rest is history.
Absolutely.
And I would tell you that I've never stood, I mean, my husband and I lived in Europe for 6 years when he was on active duty in the military, and I never stood in places where, as an American, here we are on Election Day, right, Mike?
Right.
So I never stood in places where, as an American, I felt more welcome when I was on foreign soil, as I did in Normandy, in particular, and to see American flags and thank yous to our liberators painted on store windows, and flags everywhere of our nation flying side by side. I guess that's the world I want to continue to believe in and to dream about.
Awesome. Phenomenal. You also mentioned, too, that you had some notes from a relative of yours?
Yeah, my Uncle Clarence Rao was just behind the D-Day front. So he had come over to London, and then he had to bring ammunition the troops that were battling on shore
Okay.
from the D-Day experience. And so my aunt had written some notes from Clarence. But one of the things when he was asked what was the most amazing experience,
Okay.
the one that was most memorable, he got to meet General Patton.
Really?
So that was one. Another thing that was a sobering aspect is that he laid in a foxhole. He was in the Battle of the Bulge a little bit here, and he had to lay in a foxhole next to a dead German for 4 days. So, and for 3 months he slept on the ground. So those were a few of the main points. He talks about what he made as far as money went for his military service. He talked about it was good food when sometimes hot, otherwise he ate canned food or rations the whole time. And as far as the length of time, I'm just talking about probably about 6 months or longer. It's not years and years and years of service. So it just trying to capture the little bit. He's passed away, so you try to grab what you can from the notes and make it come alive,
I know
don't
exactly
you?
what you're talking about. Both of my grandparents, my grandfathers, were in World War II, and one died before I was born, and the other one died when I was very young, so I never got to hear those stories. That's why I like talking to Mr. Rainier and Mr. Lehner to try and get their perspective, because as you said, we're losing World War II veterans more and more each day, and at some point they're going to be gone, and you will not have the opportunity to hear those stories firsthand. So it's important that we try and preserve that, and as you said, grab as much as you can while there's still time.
In this one place that my Uncle Clarence was, he was at St. Lo. Well, I learned that St. Lo had been obliterated, basically. It had been bombed so heavily. If I recall correctly, there were something like 200,000 civilian casualties, or, I mean, an extraordinary number of people passed on that day. And anyway, I remember the rubble in an American flag-draped coffin that was the center of St. Lo. So as I'm thinking about my uncle in those days, I can just see the snapshots as I've been in all these different museums and learning about the history and what that meant to the, to the locals as well as the Allies.
Well, I think we're just about out of time, so I want to thank you, Patty, for joining me today and for giving me an unforgettable story on the history of that Angovillle and the $1 bill that is making all the difference, I think. I want to encourage people again to reach out to County Executive Dreier or myself. We're going to get the information out there, so we're going to raise funds. Again, today being election day that we're recording, it couldn't make me more proud to be an American in helping with this project. So starting November 11th, we will be raising funds, and that project will go through December 7th. So if there's something you can donate, we would appreciate it, and I know definitely that the people of Angovillle Plain will appreciate it. So until next time, I'm Mayor Mike with County Executive Patty Dreier, and we've been Talking Point.
I would guess we had 40 or 50 American wounded. The church was packed with casualties.
The church was the best thing I could think of.
They were young men much like us, except they were wearing a different uniform. I tell my grandchildren my role in the war, I wasn't a rifleman killing people.